y'all. We're the Good Doctors of Abbey Research. My name is Dr. Kristen.
And I'm Dr. Erin.
You are very welcome to our corner of the internet for this hot-ish take on the 2 Woodstock documentaries that came out last summer and this summer. So essentially, this is your hot-ish take on Woodstock 99.
Woodstock 99, yeah.
Which makes it our longest-ish take in a certain way. I don't think we've ever had anything that was like 30 years.
30 years.
However, there was a bunch of buzz. As we're talking to you, it is the late summer, early fall of 2022. And there was a lot of buzz around a 3-part Netflix documentary that dropped earlier this summer about the aforementioned Woodstock 99. My husband and I were at the beach, and it was a rainy day, and so we threw it on Netflix, and about 3 minutes in, we were both texting Dr. Erin saying, we have to talk about this documentary. We then relayed that to our co-team member Eleanor, who then also watched it. And pretty soon, all 3 of us have now seen the 3-part Netflix documentary. And then thank you, Linda Holmes, our favorite culture critic, on Twitter, who mentioned that there was a HBO one that we had totally missed last summer. That was a 2-hour documentary, also about Woodstock 99. And she said, Linda, that it was a good idea to watch both. So being the completists and nerds that we are, we in fact did watch both. So it is, Too Long didn't read. We'll get into all the stuff here, but what was, for anyone watching this who's like, I don't know what Woodstock 99 was, it was the 3rd Woodstock Music Festival, and I guarantee you the last, that took place in Rome, New York in 1999. It was, according to the organizers, meant to be a 3-day peace, love, and music festival that made money. And according to many of the attendees, it was a time to get really screwed up, sleep with strangers, and do a lot of drugs. So you can see that there are 2 kind of opposing values there.
Yeah. Perspectives.
We're going to get into all of that. So first of all, Erin, I would love to know what your relationship to like Woodstock is. You're much more music lover than me. Was this like, when you were growing up, did you wish there was a Woodstock you could have gone to? Like, was this on your radar where, like, I mean, you were in Colorado, right, so going, right, I'm sure wasn't an option, but like,
right,
your awareness at the time, we were sophomores in high school, I think, when this all went down.
Yeah. So it would have been this summer between our sophomore and our junior years, because it was July 99.
Yeah.
My awareness of Woodstock, I have very, very music-loving parents. So I was raised listening to a lot of the musicians that were at Woodstock, the original Woodstock, I should say, 1969. I definitely heard about it from my parents. Like, they had different relationships with it. My parents are both kind of older boomers. They were older when they had my brother and I. And like, my mom at the time was still very conservative, lowercase c, socially conservative. And so she was like convinced that Woodstock 69 was like the evil place where there was just going to be like drugs and debauchery and all this kind of stuff. She in a very short time period, turned around to become socially liberal, like 3 years. Vietnam does that to folks. My dad was just like into the music. He was in college when Woodstock 69 happened. He would have been a sophomore in college. So I heard about it from them. I'm sure we watched the documentary. I have a lot of like kind of memories of seeing the footage. I certainly understood the iconic moments that happened there. Specifically, I mean, everyone always talks about Jimi Hendrix playing the Star Spangled Banner and then setting his guitar on fire and then bashing it on the stage. But I know I had seen a lot of footage of it. And then my relationship to Woodstock 99, I was very much into alternative rock at the time, not nu metal, which they make the distinction more in Peace, Love, and Rage, the HBO one. Explicitly, the difference between like grunge and alternative rock from the 90s and nu metal. I knew a lot of the music because I listened to like the rock channels, like radio stations. So I knew all the lyrics to Nookie by Limp Bizkit. I sang the song all the time. It was part of the soup that we swam in. But I just remember the news footage from it. I probably, like, I was a big watcher of MTV, so I probably watched some of it on MTV. I certainly remember some of the footage from MTV from that weekend, whether I watched it live or like on replays. I did not have the money for pay-per-view. Thanks so much, Michael Lang and John Scher, who were the two creators of it. And so the big bands that were performing wouldn't have been my favorites, but looking at the lineup, I was like, oh my God, this is like all my favorite bands. just not the like main stage ones. But Bush was certainly like one of my brother and I's favorite bands in the 90s. And so that was like a trip to get to see part of that history happen again. But yeah, even then I was super introverted and had no desire to be in a field with that many humans. And that was quickly confirmed by the news reports of how terrible it was. Where I was like, there was no part of me that wanted to go. But yeah, it was a weird, for an event that was supposed to bring about nostalgia for 1969, watching these documentaries brought back a lot of my nostalgia for 1999.
That's fair. Yeah.
How about yourself?
I had friends that went to 99. I have no relationship to 69 whatsoever. My parents were not, my dad was in high school. My mom was in college. Neither of them had the money to have done that, even if they wanted to, which that just wasn't really their...
They weren't, that wasn't their jam.
That wasn't their jam, but like, again, like they didn't have, they wouldn't have had the money, to take time off work and drive up there, or the means to get up to upstate New York.
Neither would have my parents at the time.
So like that wouldn't have been their thing. I had lots of friends who were super into music history in that like earnest way that teenagers are. And so like I certainly knew about Woodstock and like itsness in a way. And when 99 got announced, like I have one friend I remember went, and specifically went for Korn. And then I have lots of other friends that went for various parts of it, or like we're planning on going, and then we're going to get there late, and somebody called them from the payphones that were there and said, please don't come. It's miserable. Or people who like snuck out and ended up doing something else. The only person I know for sure that went and then came home to talk about it was this one, the Korn fan. But none of them were my music. In 1999, I was super into DC Talk, Audio Adrenaline, and original Broadway soundtracks.
I was going to say Broadway soundtracks.
Broadway cast recordings, and contemporary Christian music. I was also 2 years away from joining a festival staff myself, because while Woodstock, and then there wasn't really any huge music festivals for a long time. There was Christian music festivals. Like in 1970, the biggest one that ran forever in central Pennsylvania called Creation started. And so like I had known about music festivals forever.
Right.
And so I remember thinking 99 was just going to be like obnoxious and people were probably going to like get in a lot of trouble themselves. Not like arresting trouble, but like they were going to sleep with strangers on drugs. And that sounded like a physically poor choice to me. And then didn't really think anything of it. I am positive in July of 1999, I was on a mission trip of some fashion, or working at a camp or something like that. But I absolutely remember that news footage of the trailers burning.
Yeah.
Like 100%. And my husband, who was, of course, living in Northern Ireland at the time, said that he remembers the BBC reports and the RTE reports. It was all anyone could talk about when they would go out to the club. He was at university at the time. And what they were all kind of listening to, they were super much more into EDM than nu metal. Yes, but they definitely he definitely knew who Limp Bizkit was. He just always hated them, which is not an unpopular opinion among our circles of friends. So
they were very divisive. They were either love hate.
They
Limp
were
Bizkit.
So I'll do a couple quick things really fast to get it out of the way, and then we can deep dive into some of the bigger themes.
Yeah, I was just thinking, like, we should probably go through some of the key points of what happened, and then we can talk about our themes of why we wanted to do this hot-ish take and have this conversation.
Yeah. So fundamentally, when we say that the organizers wanted to make money, they state that explicitly in both documentaries. No one made money.
So many times. So many times.
No one made money on 69. No one made money on 94. And so this time they had to make money. And because they had to make money, they wanted a secure fence, which led to them having a abandoned Air Force base in Rome, New York. So a couple quick things. There's the symbolism of having a Woodstock at an army base, which we can tackle in a minute. But from a, like, event organizer logistical perspective, as I was looking back, I was like, okay, so tarmac is terrible in the summer.
Yeah.
Also, it being a place where planes took, like, on and off meant there's no shade. And there's, like, not really a lot of, like, it would have been kind of a dead area because they would have constructed it to not have a lot of crosswinds.
Right.
So you're just going to have 350,000 children baking
on tarmac.
Like potatoes on tarmac. This seems like a poor idea.
Unless you build infrastructure that would create a different experience, right? Like, it doesn't necessarily have to be a failure if you put up a bunch of tents for shaded areas and you have fans placed everywhere, and, like, they could have...
I mean, like, every amusement park in the world is macadam. Like, Disney and Dorney Park and Hershey Park and all those other places. But they have, like, spritz areas or tents or places you can sit down or what have you. I was amazed as we were watching this documentary that none of them seemed to remember that human beings were going to attend this.
Yeah, I think one of the, like, lasting images in my mind from these documentaries, just in relation to the terrible planningness of it all, is, like, the footage of the young people, like, hiding under the trailers.
Yeah.
Like, the merchandise trailers or whatever that were scattered around just to get any amount of shade. And it's like a whole line of trailers. Excuse me. It's like a whole line of trailers, and there's just humans, like, lying under it, trying to eke out any sort of relief from the 98 degree, like, it was air temperature 98 degrees. That is not to say what the temperature was with the tarmac and then with all the humans.
Yeah.
Like, blah. But that's the one that, like, is seared in my memory now as to how horrible. And then everyone playing in the shit mud. Yeah, so also logistically, they didn't create any ways to keep people safe, or to, like, for people to be able to find their tents again. It was very much clearly just go somewhere, drop your tent, and be done. There was no organized camp zones. Every other music festival on the planet has organized camping zones, so you know where you're going. Like, flippin' parking lots have designations for where you are.
Yeah. They didn't have...
So you can find your car. They didn't have signs.
In the crowd, they didn't have, like, aisles constructed at all, nor did they have the security to enforce any aisles that they put up. So from, like, in every sense of the word that we tell you they were there to make money, they were there to make money. They outsourced, they sold the rights to the food and beverages. So bottled water in the year of our Lord 1999 was $4 a bottle, which just, even now I'm pissed when I have to pay more than $2. So
honestly, I was thinking, like, even now, a lot of places you can still get, like, a bottle of Dasani for $1.25.
Yeah, like, I paid $4 at the Pirates game for a liter of Smart Water, like a liter.
Yeah, but it's like, we're all, you know.
But I was like, oh, it's the Pirates game, and it's a liter.
Yeah, right, yeah. So, like, they shouldn't have charged more than $1.
No,
in '99. Like, that's ridiculous.
Absolutely not. Also, all the food was stuff and they charged the same amount for beer. So you got beer or water for $4. All the food was really salty and stuff that would dehydrate kids further. We didn't see a single shot of anything fresh that would have contributed to health or hydration. So at no point in time did any of the organizers have somebody in the room that would be talking about bodies. Mm-hmm. Boggling the mind.
Or, like, user experience.
No.
Like, that was one of the things that so many of the, like, mid-level and low-level organizers talked about.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert, the two main organizers, Michael Lang, who was the organizer of the first Woodstock, and John Shear, who was the promoter that was hired to do 94 and 99, they took responsibility for nothing. In both documentaries, we'll get into generational misunderstandings as one of our themes. But a lot of the mid-level and lower-level folks did. And they were like, we realized this was a problem. You know, we saw that they were so focused on making money and did not care at all about festival goer experience or human experiences of the event. So it really is one of the most stark reminders. I think, you know, comparably, a lot of us would say, similar to what happened at Firefest a few years ago, like, when you do not consider human persons at all and you are just focused on making money, this is the disaster that happens.
Yeah. So, like, nothing that happened is surprising once you get those couple quick things out of the way. Like they took the water from the kids when they were coming in, then they charged them $4.
Yeah, they took their food. They did not take their drugs.
Mm-hmm.
They did, and then the other thing I think is important, they did have, like, water fountains. So you didn't, like, I think it was the HBO documentary, John Shear was like, they didn't have to pay $4 for water. We had water fountains. The water fountains were next to the porta potties, which were not properly maintained, cleaned, or had proper sewage or disposal of waste. So the water very quickly became contaminated.
People were also bathing in the water because you couldn't get a shower because they only had one shower station.
Because they didn't have enough shower stations. Yeah, so people were bathing in the water, so then there was, like, human filth in the drinking water. And then, because people got so frustrated about how long you had to wait in line to even get to the free water, they started breaking the pipes, and the pipes spilled into where the waste had leaked from the porta potties, and thus my earlier reference to shit mud. And people were just, like, rolling around in the mud because it looked like Woodstock and isn't this fun. And they interviewed one woman in the Netflix documentary who got trench mouth because she got feces in her mouth. So all of that happened to where it was a deeply unhygienic, unhealthy place.
And we haven't even talked about the bands.
For 300,000 people to be. Yeah, that's just the, like, physical environment.
Yeah, that's it.
We haven't even gotten to, like, the social and cultural environment yet. No. That's next.
Yeah.
In the physical environment, it was deeply unhygienic and deeply unsafe.
Yeah, and I could rant about it forever, but, like, that's that. So then,
that's the context.
In terms of themes, what I know we want to talk about is we want to talk about the generational differences in.
Yeah.
And I would like to specifically talk about how they did the lineup. Because I could conservatively talk about it for 700 years, how they did that lineup. We'd like to talk about Erin will be talking, I am going to allow her this soapbox, of the social cultural cause they chose. And what that was. So we're going to talk about that. And then we both want to talk about what is particularly shown in the HBO documentary. Rather than the Netflix one, and is also the subject of an excellent New Yorker article that we'll link in the downstairs, which is that Woodstock 99 was the very seeds of this toxic masculine incel culture that we all of us enjoying right now.
It's just amazing.
What that kind of all, it was almost like a window into the future. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, in a frighteningly scary way. Yeah, watching it was like misogynistic whiplash.
I know, there was times I was watching it, I was like, oh my god, it was the Jersey Shore in the 90s. Like, it was just a whole lot of white guys with, I could see part of their underwear. They were wearing Abercrombie and Fitch cargo shorts, a backwards baseball hat to a team they probably didn't even support, and a puka shell necklace. And it was like, it was literally like traumatic flashbacks.
It, like, a bit of it was, for both of us, like, the bro, and I haven't thought about, like, the bro culture that we grew up in as teenagers in a long time. Like, you know, Um, because even the stuff we've covered from that time period, like when we talk about Britney Spears, it wasn't really about that aspect of the culture. So I hadn't thought about it since my PhD training. And so like the now trained anthropologist in me was like, oh my God. And then the human person in me that lived through it was like, no.
This is like every nightmare I had in the year 2000. Yeah.
So yes, those are the things we want to talk about. Let's talk about generations first. I want to, before you get to the lineup, because I think that's really important, I want to talk just for another few minutes about Michael Lang and John Scher and kind of set up
Must we?
The people that ended up doing the lineup.
Who then also consented to be interviewed by both of these documentaries, which boggles my mind. And we should also say, Michael Lang has since passed.
Yes, yeah.
So
earlier this year.
I have no idea if John Scher is reading how much the planet hates him right now. But like the general consensus in the media at the moment is that John Scher is one of history's greatest monsters. So fascinating.
And we'll have a link in the downstairs here that's literally like all the horrible quotes that he said, like the documentaries, because boy, he just says some really, really terrible things.
But totally what was culturally normal in 1999. Yep.
And even culturally normal now for the age cohort that he is
in. Yep.
Like, he is one of the most like stereotypical boomers I've seen in a long time.
Upper middle class, super wealthy boomers, especially.
Yeah. So like those intersections of like age cohort, gender, race, socioeconomic status, like those four intersections, he is like the archetype of what they were. So very briefly, obviously they were both young men when Woodstock 69 happened. Michael Lang's very, very famous for being the organizer of Woodstock 69. He was the organizer for 94 and for 99. But he also then brought in John Scher to promote 94 and 99. And John Scher has been in music promotion and entertainment representation for 50 years. By now. So by 94, he's still been in the industry for 20 years working. And was one of the biggest music promoters at the time.
And for anyone who doesn't know, promoter is people who is the person who books acts for things, who gets people on tours. That's what promoter means in the music industry sense. Yeah.
So, they both had very specific, nostalgic, romanticized visions and versions of what happened at Woodstock 69. Both documentaries go into it a little bit in terms of kind of the mythology that was created around Woodstock 69 and how what was represented in the documentary that became very, very popular about that festival was such a sliver of what actually happened, but it kind of seeped into the American consciousness that like that representation was Woodstock 69. So they had this like very appropriately generational nostalgic perspective on this concert. But because they decided in the 90s that they also wanted to make money, they knew they couldn't bring back like the Doors and Willie Nelson and half the people from Woodstock 69 were dead already. So you can't have Janis Joplin come back or Jimi Hendrix come back.
But interestingly, the 90s, in 94, they said they brought back very similar vibes. Yeah. But those vibes weren't making money. So just to connect those dots really quickly, like they did have Willie Nelson at 99. I was gonna get to that. Yeah. But that was so the acts that they had at 99 that were more representational of the vibe of 69 were 100% because John Scher wanted them to be there. So he had Willie Nelson open on the Sunday, the last day of the festival. Paraphrasing him, because I wanted it to happen and I was so happy about it. And so it was this interesting dichotomy of these older, these stereotypical boomers that don't necessarily understand the generation they want to make this concert for, this festival. And
they understood enough about what was popular music at that time to book a lot of the events, which you'll get into as soon as I finish this thought. So they understood what the generation wanted in terms of like what was popular, but not what they wanted in terms of like a festival experience.
Correct.
So they put all of their generational perceptions and wishes onto a completely different generation. And so, you know, when we get into like the cause du jour that Woodstock 99 was, I'll talk a little bit more about those generational differences. But it's important to kind of set that up for then Kristen now to talk about how those generational differences manifested in the most schizophrenic festival lineup we have ever seen.
Okay, so Friday wasn't really that bad in terms of vibes and some other stuff. It wasn't great. My main problem with Friday, on Friday, we kick off with James Brown, which I don't understand why. And then they go to Sugar Ray, which I was very disappointed we didn't get any Sugar Ray content in any of the documentaries.
But he canceled.
Oh, Sugar Ray canceled.
The one that I'm looking at, the lineup that I'm looking at says he was billed but canceled.
Oh, well, okay.
So we went from G Love and Special Sauce to Jamiroquai.
Oh, good Lord. To live to Sheryl Crow. That's an okay bridge.
Yeah.
Sheryl Crow to DMX, questionable. Questionable bridge. DMX to The Offspring, like energy-wise okay, but not the same genre. DMX is, there were like 3 artists of color, 3 women and 3 artists of color. DMX had a whole other separate thing that the MTV documentary got into about race at Woodstock that we are not going to touch because not enough other people have talked about it for us to really understand. But if for no other reason than that conversation, watch the HBO one. Yeah. So then DMF, like I said, goes to The Offspring. I will always love The Offspring. The Offspring goes to Korn. That's okay. That's a good vibe up. That's okay. Korn then goes to Bush.
Which is, I think, their equivalent of trying to, like, calm the audience down.
Possibly. But I don't think they really understood who Korn was. And that's, an abrupt down.
Yeah, or what Korn was going to do to the audience on top of what The Offspring had done, on top of what DMX had done.
Like, they didn't understand rising energy at all. So,
not at all.
Gavin Rossdale talks about being, like, terrified when he walked out there. Because that's the other thing. You have a responsibility to the artists that you have booked to keep them safe as well as to the crowd. And John Scheer had no interest in anyone's safety except his own.
No, and that was the fascinating thing that was present in both documentaries, was the analysis from the artists on, because obviously you perform that much, you get real good at reading a crowd and what that crowd needs and what you need to do. So we have analysis from like Jewel, Moby, from Sheryl Crow, from Moby, from Fatboy Slim,
Korn. Yeah,
from Korn, from Bush,
from The Offspring.
The Offspring, like everybody that they could find, the Roots. I know Tariq was in there as well talking about it. And it was a really fascinating thing to hear from Gavin about how he approached what their set was going to look like after literally Korn set the place emotionally on fire.
Yeah.
The fires didn't start till the next night, but like, and fair dues to the lead singer for Korn, Jonathan Larson?
I thought it was Davis, but okay.
Davis, yeah.
Or Davies, one of the two. I just know his name is Jonathan. Yeah.
Jonathan, yes, the lead singer of Korn, was really honest about how he approached it, and he was like, I blacked out. I have no idea what the rest of that night was. I knew, like, I just saw the crowd, and it had, did his performance, and that's what artists do. And as you said, like, it's incumbent on the organizers to keep the artist safe and to keep the fans safe so that everyone can have the best experience.
Yeah. So like, Korn should have closed and then the energy could disperse. Like, the problem with having somebody on after Korn was you kept the energy all right there. And then it became Gavin Rossdale's job to do something with that energy. Now, thankfully, Gavin Rossdale, I mean, I'm sure even now, but then he was at the top of his game. Bush was one of the biggest alt bands in the world. He was very good at crowds, but there was other people that if you had put them up there, that was an incredibly inappropriate ask to put on him. And you could still see he's traumatized by that experience, and he should be.
Yeah, and then the number of times that John Shear specifically talked about how it was the artist's responsibility to control the crowd.
And that's not how this works.
That's not how music works.
So then after this, like, some of these kids, this is day one, some of these kids are going to go to the all-night rave tent and they're going to sleep with randoms and do things they've never done before. That's not great. We got a lot of undercooked humans who are not hydrated, not rested, over da-da-da-da-da. So then we wake up the next morning and we start off with the Canadian classics, the Tragically Hip. Then you go into Kid Rock. Okay. Then from Kid Rock, you go to Wyclef Jean. Wyclef Jean to Counting Crows to Dave Matthews to Alanis Morissette.
That's a good chunk.
Good. That all makes sense. And then you go from Alanis Morissette with a 15-minute break to Limp Bizkit. Then from Limp Bizkit, you decide to go to Rage Against the Machine. And then you decide to close the evening with Metallica. And then you just tell them to go to the rave tent.
And listen to Moby.
Saturday night was Fatboy Slim, and they got him the hell out of there.
Oh, okay. I mixed up who was Friday.
Yeah, Friday was Moby, I think, and Saturday was Fatboy Slim, because that was when they were high enough and ridiculous enough that somebody drove a stolen ambulance into the middle of the rave tent, and hangar, and had to get people out of there. And what I felt really bad, too, for the guy who was in charge of the rave hangar, because he very obviously was trying to take that seriously and, like, trying to be really clear. And they're like, no one told me that there was bad behavior anywhere else. Limp Bizkit set got completely out of control. No one told the rest of the staff. Fred Durst was, like, crowd surfing on plywood. Like, no one told anyone else. They all had walkie-talkies. They all could have known. So then so Sunday is, like, again, we got really, really, really weird stuff. But the one that I can't quite square is Elvis Costello. And then to Jewel. Jewel is in both documentaries talking extensively about how she essentially, it sounds to me like, cut her set short and left because she didn't feel safe anymore. And then you have Creed, and Scott Stappman said the same thing. And then you close out with Red Hot Chili Peppers. That, honestly, I would have Red Hot Chili Peppers is a fantastic closer. Californication was out. That's a fantastic closer. They're okay vibes enough that, like, they're not the new metal, like, that you...
No, they were definitely...
They were a great closer.
Yeah.
Great closer for a festival. We'll get into what happened after, with Red Hot Chili Peppers in a minute when you start talking about your thing. But what is shocking to me is that Michael Lang says that he had never heard of any of the bands he signed off on. You had a lot of money, and you supposedly were doing this for your children. Surely someone could have told you what machine they were raging against. Like, I understand Google was young, but, like, you could have done a little bit more here.
There's footage of their concerts. You can get access to their lyrics.
Literally gone to a concert before, like, you live in New York, and I'm sure you have a private plane. Like, go and figure this all out. Yes, these are all of the acts in 1999, besides the boy bands, who were making the most money. Very few of these are festival-appropriate acts. Because, again, Rage, if you're going to do Rage at a festival... You have to be very careful of the other kind of fans you're bringing in. I shouldn't say, like, festival appropriate. Like, a eclectic festival appropriate. Like, this is not energy you want to be mixing in with people who are coming to see Alanis Morissette. Like, it's just it's not fair to anyone.
Yeah, and I think one of the points that was very often made in both documentaries was that there was a real failure to understand, from the organizer's point of view, which bands were going to bring in the most people.
Yes.
And which is silly, because they could probably just look at, like, record sales to understand that.
Yeah, but it was going to be Korn, Limp, and Rage.
And Red Hot Chili
Peppers. It was going to be, like, Metallica, not really at that point, but so it was going to be those four.
Yeah, and, like, you know, in terms of musical cohesion, I don't hate the Limp Bizkit, Rage, Metallica being together.
No,
in terms of what it did to the crowd, terrible idea.
Yeah.
But like
I'm
so
sitting
they
at my
kept-
house and like somebody's going to play those records in a row. That makes total sense.
Yeah, thematically, stylistically, but public safety wise, no. And, you know, the pay-per-view people that were there, the MTV people that were there that were covering it just kept asking people, like, who are you here to see? Who are you here to see? And it was Limp Bizkit, Rage, Limp Bizkit, Kid Rock, like
Korn.
Korn. I didn't see anybody that they interviewed, and maybe they were making a point in the documentary that said, you know, Wyclef Jean, Counting Crows.
Creed. I'm here to see Creed. We were already all making fun of Creed in 1999.
So it's like, yeah, they had a diverse range of artists, but they didn't have the crowd to match the diversity of the artists. They were there mostly to listen to a particular genre of rock, and those who fell closest either into it or like adjacent to it, which is the new metal. And the typical, stereotypical person listening to new metal was mostly 18 to 24-year-old white middle class, working class men.
Yeah.
And so that was the majority of the audience, especially on all three of those nights.
We should say too, they had
those like finals.
They had 2 other stages.
Yeah.
So they had an understanding of like different genres. And they could have put some of these people, like what they should have done is like anyone who was here to see Jewel or Counting Crows, they were on literally another stage.
Yeah, they could have had like an alternative stage or something.
Like
that was just like, yeah,
that's
all those other bands.
And I think that's what Lollapalooza does now is like themed stages. I mean, that's certainly what the festival I worked at, that's what we did. We had themed stages.
And it's like, I'm looking at and they kind of did that with the West Stage, but they just put some of the big names that should probably have been on the West Stage on the main stage.
Yeah.
So like the West Stage on the Saturday was Guster, Everclear, Collective Soul, Chemical Brothers. Those are all like alt rock.
Yeah, Dave should have been there.
Dave should have been there. Counting Crows should have been there. But then, you know, you're putting all of the angry young white men in one group together. But yeah, it was just, as we said, like as we're going through it, like totally schizophrenic and totally emblematic of that just cultural blind spot, generational blind spot that these folks had.
Yeah, and this is the kind of, too, like somebody put, and I think it was Wesley Morris, or Moby, I think it was actually, that talked about the problem with new metal is it took a lot of, and new metal isn't around anymore popularity-wise for a lot of reasons, including that it took all of the kind of countercultural messages of grunge and rock and stripped out all of those and turned it into misogyny and frat boy culture. Turned it into, Moby broke out the word troglodyte, because of course he did. And it becomes Kid Rock dancing up there, literally like grabbing his crotch as he's dancing. And Limp Bizkit's biggest song being about doing literally everything for head. And what, like, that was his driving goal in life.
Yeah. And Moby's, I have the notes here on what Moby's like full quote, which is, I think, worth bringing up. I paraphrased it. But he said, you know, when white people took on rap, like when Kid Rock started putting that into they ignored the funk. Mm-hmm. And when they took on rock, they ignored the progressivism of it. And they just kept the misogyny and the homophobia. Yep. And then beloved Dave Holmes, who was actually one of the best VJs MTV ever had, was in the HBO documentary a lot. And he said, you know, the lineups were aimed at the most angry 24-year-olds in your life. Yep. So, like, it was literally like, I think one of the talking heads said, you know, kerosene, match, boom. Like, you create an environment that is not at all user conscious or friendly or concerned at all with the user experience. You have no security whatsoever. Yeah, you hire like random teenagers from Brooklyn to be your peace patrol. and they're off getting high and getting laid and not generally trained to be security guards at such a high capacity event.
High stakes event.
Yeah. And then you bring those musicians out. And I remember the two of us sat watching by both times they got to Limp Bizkit. And the organizers were just like so mad at Fred Durst for being Fred Durst. And we had to pause and we were like, wait a second. You hired Limp Bizkit to come here and you expected Fred Durst not to be himself? Like, what are you doing?
He has never been secret about who he is. Like, no. Fred Durst is exactly what he says on the tin. Like, this is what they do. And
this is one of the reasons why he was so flippin' popular for that period of time. And it was, like, so intense. People loved his, like, don't give a fuck attitude.
Yeah, his, like, I'm an everyman. I wear clothes that you can buy at Hot Topic.
And I'm telling you, it's okay to be angry and break shit.
Yep.
So they got angry.
And they broke shit.
And they broke stuff. So we get to Saturday night and Limp Bizkit is out there riling up the crowd and they start tearing stuff down. They've been throwing stuff on stage all day, hitting artists with glass bottles. Why are there glass bottles in an event? But yeah, then they start to like actually destroy the physical infrastructure.
Somebody said it was one of the attendees summed it up best, and we'll now transition into the cause they tried to impose upon the event. It was a complete and total lack of respect. Lack of respect from the organizers to the attendees, from the attendees to the grounds, from the grounds to the attendees. The entire thing was a lack of respect, and I think that's a really good way to put it. We should also say we're not going to get into it extensively because in some way there was always going to be sexual assault at an event like this. And I think my shock was how many people were shocked by it. But this is also an incredibly generational attitude in which John Scheer actually says like it wasn't that many. Because statistically like we were a city and so it wasn't that many. Also, a very generational attitude that a lot of the boys at that point in time had no idea how prevalent sexual assault was, and so when it happened in front of them, they didn't know what was happening.
And there was a lot of victim blaming from him and Michael Lang as well, which is very generational.
Very generational, and huge during this Girls Gone Wild phase era. Which I had blocked out of my brain.
Oh my god, 100% had blocked Girls Gone Wild from my brain, and then I was like, oh my god, yes.
And I had to explain to your mother like we weren't just using the phrase, it was an actual brand, and I was like, I wish I didn't know it was an actual brand. Like I wish I hadn't been at parties.
77-year-old mother what Girls Gone Wild was. This is the time in our lives. Yeah, but we could probably do a separate video talking about the toxic masculinity and misogyny and rape culture that was prevalent. And as students of those cultural facets now and women who have experienced those cultural facets our whole lives, we were not surprised at what happened to women and girls at that event. We were not surprised at the reaction to it. We were like...
We should also say there was absolutely no reporting on any queer abuse that happened, but I am positive it did. Sure.
There had to have been to gender, to non-binary folks or gender fluid folks or people with non-heteronormative gender expressions. I'm sure there was a lot of physical violence and verbal abuse, and you can just insert what you think a crowd of that
energy
level of energy and privilege and anger would do to people that they see as non-conforming.
Yep.
And fill in the blanks. We will say that neither of the documentaries covered kind of the rape culture aspect as much as we would have liked. The HBO did a much better job.
Much better.
Than Netflix, but
which ignored it almost entirely.
Which mentioned just like throw a couple throwaway comments about the 4 reported rapes, and a couple quotes from the organizers about it. So the HBO one does much better at talking about it. And as you said as well, talking about the racial aspect of it, which is, again, like a whole separate video. But I think what we want to close out with talking about here is the cause of the day, the cause du jour for Woodstock 99. Because, you know, one of the big legacies in the mythology of Woodstock 69 was that it was a protest, part of a protest movement. And that this group of humans wanted to get together to talk about peace and love in opposition to the Vietnam War. That was throughout the whole decade of the 60s. So by the end of the 60s, a lot of young folks were upset about it. So it was a lot, they were protesting a lot of things at Woodstock 69, but it was really mostly about the Vietnam War and American imperialism and military-industrial complex and all of that. Again, the irony that Woodstock 99 was on a military base is just staggering. But the cause for the 99 Woodstock, they decided to make gun violence. Now, July of 99 was 3 months after the high school shooting at Columbine High School in Littleton, just south of Denver, Colorado. For those of you that maybe aren't aware of it, of our international viewers, and is one of those cultural touchstone moments for our generation, without question. You and I have talked about this loads of times. We remember where we were. We remember what we were doing. We remember how it changed our understanding of high school and our understanding of the world. Eventually, it is one of those generational moments. But we both talked about this as we were watching the documentaries. It did not immediately for us become a hot button issue that we were very concerned about.
I also remembered that we weren't calling it gun violence, we were calling it school safety.
It was a school shooting.
Yeah, so like everything was about school safety. It was about metal detectors, and it wasn't about the national conversation was not about guns.
It was not about gun violence. No, it was about making schools safer. Which was not at all. I mean, you know, more on this in a minute, but gun violence and conversations in the United States have never really been about the guns. It's always been about all the other factors. So at that time, we were having a huge conversation about the music culture. There was a hell of a lot of blame being thrown at bands like Marilyn Manson and Korn, who were two of the bigger artists that the shooters at Columbine listened to regularly. There was a lot of blame going at popular movies at the time. I remember, like, so much analysis being done about The Matrix because Neo wore a black trench coat.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and the shooters wore black trench coats.
Video games. So don't forget that video games were why Columbine happened.
Video games were why Columbine happened. It was never about, we never had conversations about gun violence. And you and I were, you know, sophomores in high school when Columbine happened, and we never thought it was going to happen again.
Yeah.
Why would we?
I became fascinated with the idea that it did, because there was more, like Paducah, Kentucky, and a couple other that year, but I remember thinking, and I wasn't weird in this thought. We just have to come up with ways that these kids aren't so angry.
Yeah.
It boggles my mind as a pedestrian. I don't even know what word I'm looking for right now. As somebody who wasn't involved in gun violence activism at all until very recently, why they thought this was the cause.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, I think this ties back to our theme that's run through our whole analysis, in that it was a huge lack of generational awareness. It was, gun violence was something that the organizers were very upset about. And they were right that it was something that was affecting our generation. But as we said, the conversations that were happening culturally were not about I mean, they were a bit, and like, you know, I won't get into the details, but growing up in Colorado and living in Colorado at that time, we had a much more expansive conversation than happened nationally in terms of like, there was a lot of conversation in Colorado about how they got access to the guns and, you know, all of this carry on. But the majority
the rest of us just
focus,
moved on to blaming popular media really quickly.
Yeah, but that was a huge focus even for our local coverage as well. I remember like when they found their journals and when they, you know, all of this kind of, and then the trial happened later that year and into the next year, and they dug all that stuff up again. But the focus was never about the guns specifically. It was about what made those young men do what they did. And no one at the time really was prepared nationally, culturally, to have a conversation that the guns were part of the problem. So you can imagine how popular this was as a theme at Woodstock 99. They did have a gun violence awareness nonprofit who was there talking to folks and like getting them to sign up for, I don't know, mail newsletters, like
or like a petition. I think it was a petition.
It was a petition. Yeah.
The original change.org.
Yeah. And then they decided at the end of the festival, on Sunday after Red Hot Chili Peppers, they were going to have a candlelight vigil for Columbine. Now, it's not on paper. It's not a bad idea. On paper, I would have argued like handing candles to young people whose brains aren't fully cooked is not a great idea, no matter what the circumstance. But certainly after you had seen how Friday and Saturday had gone, doubling down on the candles is one of the most asinine things I've ever seen.
Yeah, and then being shocked that they used the candles to set fire to other things.
I laugh about it because it is one of the more like shockingly dense things I've seen. A lot of things didn't surprise me that came out of the mouths of the organizers. What did surprise me was their insistence on not understanding. Even now, like even reflecting on it, you know, 30, 40, 50 years later. Now we're 30 years, 50 years from the original. Like just the fact that even upon reflection, they were like, well, we thought it was a good idea. They set fire to everything. Why did you hand 300,000 live candles to a dehydrated, drunk, dirty, sick, angry crowd? But again, I think that's so emblematic of the real rot at the heart of this festival was this lack of understanding who their audience was and persisting in placing their expectations, their hopes and goals on a generation that didn't care about gun violence at the time. And as, you know, our beloved Eleanor said, like, that was actually the demographic of people who were buying guns.
Yeah.
I'm sure there were a lot of young men in that audience who, whether or not they agreed with what the shooters in Columbine did, the end result, probably agreed with a lot of their thoughts and feelings about the world and about high school and about, you know, all of that stuff. Obviously, if the angry, aggressive music spoke to so many of them, there was that through point. So yeah, I think it's fascinating that this was kind of like at the start of our gun violence journey over the last 20 years. And I think if you were to have a festival now where gun violence and school shootings was the cause du jour, you would get a lot of people invested in it because of what we've experienced.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of that journey over the last 20 years, America has been through it a little bit. But so has the rest of the world. And America has made very different decisions with its gun control laws and policies than a lot of the rest of the world has. And we're going to be talking about that in a 10-episode, 5-week series coming up on our podcast. If you're listening to this as it drops in real time, the first week of September, then join us on September 19th on the Culture Cast for a wide-ranging conversation, including the history of gun violence and gun violence prevention in the United States. Eleanor will actually be joining us for a Canadian perspective. We have some conversations with other folks talking about reporting in. Aaron and I have talked to people from around the world. We're going to explain Dunblane, Scotland, and how Scotland reacted, and what community policing without guns can maybe look like. And also what it means for your organization and your family and your life, and kind of the everyday effects that as Americans we don't even think about because they're just so part of our lives, but the rest of the world is telling us that they don't have to be this way if we don't want them to be. And so we're going to have that conversation that that Woodstock 99 wished we had had. We are now going to have on the Culture Cast in a couple weeks.
And we will, in fact, be talking more about Columbine as well during that, because I know you're doing a book review on the Columbine shooting as well. So wide-ranging conversation. We're gonna have a lot of these topics brought up again in terms of masculinity and gun culture in America, and really, really dig into the hard conversation that a lot of people are having now. So we're going to add our voices to that, and we hope you join us for it. Links to subscribe and to find the Culture Cast on your podcatcher of choice will be in the downstairs. But I think we've run out of steam on this particular edition of talking about Woodstock 99. I'm not going to close us out because we're both so fascinated by it, and if we ever figure out what the hell those boys were so angry about, we're going to have another hottish take. But I think for now, we'll press pause, as we say.
We do want to give a special space to all the people whose lives were irreparably changed that weekend, whether because they or a loved one passed away, because they were sexually assaulted, because they sexually assaulted someone. We have a feeling that the ripples of that event aren't being traced really at all. And therefore, the ways that that thing has affected people is not known. So we want to acknowledge that and hold a little bit of space. Because for some people, this became they survived it, and not they experienced it. And we do want to acknowledge that. We are happy to talk about this at any time of the day or night. This has been almost all we've been talking about for a week. So if you want to talk to us about it, that's what the comment section is for. We would love to hear from you and go back and forth. Shout out to our friend Laura, who said she felt like she was the only person who was watching this. Laura, obviously, you are not. And we would love to have be in conversation with you and anyone else about this. We never know when another hottish take is popping up, but in between now and when we see you again, our hope is that you are safe, seen, known, and understood. We'll talk to you guys later.
Bye.